In the brutal world of the Moretti crime family, weakness isn't just looked down upon, it is a death sentence. For Dante Moretti, the paralyzed heir to the city's largest criminal empire, his 28th birthday was supposed to be just another reminder of his isolation. He sat alone at a table for 10, surrounded by empty chairs and the cold stares of men waiting for him to die. But destiny has a funny way of showing up, or in this case, walking in wearing a stained apron and holding a cheap cupcake. This is the story of how a single mum waitress challenged the devil, and how the broken king found his queen. You won't believe the twist in part 6. The chandelier above table 1 at the Gilded Lily cost more than Sarah Jenkins would make in 5 years. It cast a fracturing, diamond-like light over the man sitting beneath it, but it did nothing to warm the ice in his eyes. Dante Moretti sat in a custom-engineered titanium wheelchair, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. He was dressed in a suit that whispered of Savile Row, cut perfectly to hide the atrophy in his legs, but nothing could hide the atmosphere of desolate loneliness that surrounded him. It was 8:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. The restaurant, usually buzzing with the elite of New York's financial and criminal underworld, was strangely hushed. Everyone knew who sat at table 1. Everyone knew that today was the day the Prince of the City turned 28, and everyone saw that he was completely alone. "More wine, sir?" the maitre d', a nervous man named Arthur, asked, his voice trembling. "No," Dante said. His voice was a low rumble, like a luxury car idling in a garage. "Leave the bottle and remove the other settings." "Sir." "The other 9 settings," Dante said, not looking up from the tablecloth. "Take them away. No one is coming." Across the room, near the swinging kitchen doors, Sarah adjusted her apron. She was exhausted. Her 5-year-old daughter, Lily, had a fever again, and the babysitter charge was eating into her tips. Sarah had only been working at the Gilded Lily for 3 weeks. She didn't know the politics. She didn't know the unwritten rules. "Who is that?" Sarah whispered to Marco, the senior waiter. "He looks devastating." Marco's eyes went wide. "Shh! That's Dante Moretti, the boss's son." "Why is he alone?" "Because 3 years ago, a car bomb took his legs and his spirit," Marco hissed, wiping a glass nervously. "His father, Don Vittorio, despises weakness. He rents the restaurant for the boy's birthday every year. But the family, they don't show up anymore. They think he's cursed. Do not make eye contact, Sarah. He has a temper." Sarah looked back at the man. She didn't see a monster or a mobster. She saw the same look she sometimes saw in her own mirror when the bills piled up and the loneliness became a physical weight. She saw a human being who was hurting. Dante watched the staff scurry away with the extra plates. The clinking of the silverware sounded like a funeral toll. "Happy birthday to me," he thought bitterly. 28 years old, half a man, the heir to nothing. He reached for his wine glass, but his hand spasmed, a tremor that had been getting worse lately. The crystal glass tipped. Red wine, dark as blood, spilled across the pristine white tablecloth and dripped onto his lap. The silence in the restaurant became absolute. Dante froze. The humiliation burned his neck. He waited for the staff to rush over, but they hesitated, terrified of his reaction. He was the cripple prince, known for throwing bottles when his frustration peaked. But before he could curse, a white napkin was pressed gently against his lap. "It happens to the best of us," a soft voice said. "My daughter spilled grape juice on the cat this morning. Trust me, red wine on wool is easier to fix than a purple cat." Dante looked up. He found himself staring into eyes the color of warm honey. It was the new waitress. Her name tag said Sarah. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't looking at his legs. She was looking at him. "Get away from me," Dante snarled, his defense mechanism kicking in. "I don't need your pity." Sarah didn't flinch. She continued dabbing the wine, her movements efficient and motherly. "It's not pity, Mr. Moretti. It's club soda and salt. If I let this set, the stain wins, and I don't like letting the bad things win." Dante was struck dumb. No one spoke to him like that. Not since the accident. "I said leave it," he warned, though with less venom. "Almost done," Sarah said, standing up and brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She looked at the empty table, the single glass, the oppressive silence. She took a deep breath, knowing she was about to do something that could get her fired. "Hold on," she said. "Where are you going?" Dante demanded, surprised that he actually wanted to know. "I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere," she said, then winked. "Not that you have anywhere to be." It was a risky, cheeky comment, a joke about his mobility, or just his schedule. For the first time in 3 years, the corner of Dante's mouth twitched. 5 minutes later, the kitchen door swung open. The restaurant was still dead silent. The patrons were watching the drama unfold at table 1 with morbid curiosity. Sarah walked out. She wasn't carrying a silver platter or a bottle of Dom Perignon. She was holding a small, slightly lopsided chocolate cupcake, the kind the kitchen staff ate during breaks. Stuck into the center of it was a single, flickering white candle. She walked straight to Dante. "I couldn't find a 28, she whispered, placing the cupcake on the wine-stained tablecloth. "So this one represents the first year of the rest of your life." Dante stared at the flame. It danced in the draft of the air conditioning. It was such a small, pathetic thing compared to the grandeur of the room, yet it was the only real warmth he had felt all night. "Why are you doing this?" Dante asked, his voice rough. "Because no one should be alone on their birthday," Sarah said simply. "Make a wish." Dante closed his eyes. "I wish I could walk. I wish I could kill the man who planted the bomb. I wish I wasn't invisible." He blew out the candle. A smattering of applause broke out from a nearby table. Tourists who didn't know who he was. Then, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant banged open. The atmosphere instantly shifted from awkward to terrifying. Vittorio Moretti walked in. The Don was 60 years old, built like a linebacker, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards and a younger, sleeker man, Silvio, Dante's cousin. Vittorio stopped at the table. He didn't look at Dante. He looked at the cupcake. He looked at Sarah. "What is this circus?" Vittorio boomed. His voice echoed off the walls. Sarah took a step back, her instinct to protect the child kicking in, even though Dante was a grown man. "I was just bringing him a dessert, sir." Vittorio looked at her with pure disgust. "A dessert? You serve the son of Vittorio Moretti a stale kitchen scrap?" He swiped his hand, knocking the cupcake off the table. It splattered onto the floor. "Father," Dante said, his voice tight. "Silence," Vittorio snapped. "You sit there, paralyzed, letting the help mock you with children's treats? You are an embarrassment, Dante. I told the family not to come because I wanted to spare them the sight of you pitying yourself." Silvio, the cousin, smirked. He was dressed in a suit that was just a little too shiny. He leaned in. "Happy birthday, cousin. Looks like you found a nanny." Vittorio turned his rage on Sarah. You're fired. Get out of my establishment. If I see you in this city again, you'll wish you were never born." Sarah's face paled. "Sir, please, I have a daughter. I need this job." "Get out!" Vittorio roared. Sarah trembled, tears welling in her eyes. She turned to run, humiliated and terrified. Stay where you are! The voice didn't come from Vittorio. It came from the wheelchair. Dante slammed his hand onto the table, the sound cracking like a gunshot. The silverware rattled. For a second, he looked exactly like his father. Dangerous, lethal, commanded. She stays, Dante said, his eyes locking with Vittorio's. Vittorio looked at his son, surprised by the sudden spine. Excuse me? I said she stays, Dante repeated. In fact, she's quitting. I am, Sarah squeaked. Yes, Dante said, ignoring her, because I'm hiring her. Silvio laughed. Hiring her? As what? Someone to wipe your chin? Dante turned his gaze to Silvio. It was a cold, dead stare that made the cousin stop laughing instantly. As my personal assistant, my liaison. And since I own 40% of the shares in this family's legitimate holdings, Father, you cannot stop me from hiring staff for my own household. Vittorio stared at his son. He saw something he hadn't seen since before the bomb. Fire. Fine, Vittorio spat. Play house with the waitress, but don't expect her to save you when the wolves come knocking. Come, Silvio. The air in here is stale. The Don turned and marched out, his entourage trailing behind. Dante sat in the silence, his chest heaving. He turned to Sarah, who was shaking. I can't be your assistant, Sarah stammered. I don't know anything about whatever it is you do. Dante reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the table next to the stain. You treated me like a man, Sarah. That is a qualification no one else has. He looked at her, his eyes intense. I will pay you 5 times what you make here. Full benefits. And I'll make sure no one, not even my father, threatens you or your daughter again. Sarah looked at the card. It was a lifeline, but she also saw the danger radiating off him. Be at the address on the card tomorrow at 9 a.m., Dante said. He spun his wheelchair around. Don't be late. The address was not a house. It was a fortress. Sarah stood at the iron gates of the Moretti estate on Long Island, clutching her frayed purse. The morning sun did little to warm the imposing stone facade of the mansion. She had dropped Lily off at school, telling her that Mommy had a special new job. 5 times my salary, she reminded herself. Health insurance for Lily. She buzzed the intercom. The gates groaned open without a word. As she walked up the long gravel driveway, she felt eyes on her. Cameras were everywhere. She was met at the front door, not by a butler, but by a man who looked like a vending machine with a gun. I'm Sarah. Mr. Moretti is expecting me, she said. The man, whose name she would later learn was Dominic, grunted and opened the door. Library. End of the hall. The house was beautiful but cold. It smelled of lemon polish and old secrets. Sarah walked into the library, a room with ceilings 2 stories high and walls lined with books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Dante was there, facing the window, looking out at the gardens. He was not in the suit today. He wore a cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, but just as intense. You came, he said, not turning around. You offered me a job I couldn't refuse, Sarah said, trying to sound brave. Dante spun the chair around. Do you know what my family does, Sarah? I read the papers, Sarah said. Construction, waste management, unions. And people say you hurt people who get in your way. Dante studied her. And yet you are here. I have a little girl, Mr. Moretti. Her name is Lily. She has asthma and needs braces, and she deserves a life where her mother isn't working double shifts until 2 a.m. I'll mop floors. I'll organize files. I'll cook. Just tell me the rules. Dante wheeled closer. Rule number 1. You see nothing. Rule number 2. You hear nothing. Rule number 3. You never lie to me. I can do that, Sarah said. Good. Because your first task is not mopping floors. Dante picked up a thick file from his desk and threw it toward her. It slid across the mahogany surface. My cousin Silvio manages the accounts for the Midtown construction projects. I believe he is stealing from the family. I need someone who isn't on the payroll to go through these receipts and find the leak. Sarah blinked. You want me to audit the Mafia? I want you to check the math. You've been a waitress for 6 years, Sarah. You know how to balance a till. You know when someone is skimming. Look for the ghost employees. Look for the supplies that were purchased but never delivered. And if I find something, then I reclaim my power, Dante said darkly. For the next week, Sarah worked in the library. It was terrifying, but exhilarating. She brought a chaotic energy to Dante's silent tomb. She brought pictures of Lily and put them on her small desk. She opened the curtains to let the light in, despite Dante's protests. They fell into a rhythm. Sarah would work on the ledgers, and Dante would work on his rehabilitation. One afternoon, Sarah watched as Dante tried to lift himself from his chair to the parallel bars set up in the corner of the room. He was sweating, his muscles shaking with effort. He collapsed back into the chair, letting out a roar of frustration. "Damn it!" he yelled, throwing a towel across the room. Sarah didn't look away. She stood up and walked over to him. "You're doing it wrong," she said. Dante glared at her. "I have the best physical therapists in the world." "They're afraid of hurting you," Sarah said. "They treat you like glass. You're not glass." She stepped in close. "Put your arm around my neck." "Sarah, don't do it." Dante hesitated, then wrapped his heavy arm around her shoulders. She was small, but she was surprisingly strong. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. They moved together. Sarah took the brunt of his weight, bracing her knees against his. Dante gritted his teeth, his face inches from hers. He smelled of sandalwood and expensive soap. She smelled of vanilla and rain. For a moment he was standing. Really standing. He looked down at her, his eyes wide with shock. The physical proximity was electric. He hadn't been this close to a woman in years. He could see the gold flecks in her eyes. He could feel the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. "You're standing," she whispered. "I'm leaning," he corrected, his voice husky. "It's a start." The door to the library creaked open. Silvio stood in the doorway, a fake smile plastered on his face. He took in the scene. Sarah holding Dante up, their faces close, the ledgers spread out on the desk behind them. "Well, well," Silvio drawled, his eyes cold and calculating. "I didn't know the new assistant offered physical services." Dante's arm tightened around Sarah protectively. He didn't sit down. He held his ground, using Sarah as his anchor. "What do you want, Silvio?" Dante asked. "Just came to drop off the weekly reports," Silvio said, walking into the room. He glanced at the open files on Sarah's desk. His eyes narrowed as he recognized the Midtown accounts. The air in the room turned freezing. Silvio looked at Sarah, and for the first time, she saw the true face of a killer. "You're working hard, sweetheart," Silvio said softly. "Make sure you don't work yourself to death." He dropped a file on the table and walked out. As soon as he was gone, Dante collapsed back into his chair, gasping for air. But it wasn't from the exertion, it was fear. Not for himself, but for her. "He knows," Dante said. "Sarah, you have to go. Take Lily and go." "I'm not going anywhere," Sarah said, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I found the leak, Dante. Silvio isn't just stealing. He's funneling money to the Russians. He's building a war chest." Dante looked at her, stunned. "If that's true, he's planning a coup. He's going to kill my father." "And you," Sarah added. Dante reached out and took her hand. His grip was iron. Then we have to kill him first. The silence in the library following Silvio's departure was heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes a hurricane. Dante didn't waste a second. He wheeled himself to the desk, his movements sharp and frantic. You need to leave. Now, go to the school, pick up Lily, and drive north. Don't go to your apartment. Don't go to the bank. Sarah stood frozen, her hands hovering over the ledgers. Dante, stop. I'm not leaving you here. If he's planning a coup, you're the first loose end he'll tie up. I can handle Silvio, Dante lied. He opened a drawer and pulled out a heavy, matte black Glock 19. He checked the chamber with a practiced, lethal fluidity that reminded Sarah he wasn't just a businessman. He was a Moretti. I am a liability to you, Sarah. I can't run. I can't fight the way I used to. You have a child. Exactly, Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. I have a child. And if I leave now, and Silvio knows I saw these books, he'll come after me anyway to make sure I stay quiet. My only safety is with you. And your only chance of survival is, well, you need legs. And right now, I'm them. Dante looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but beneath it, a spine of steel. She was right. Separated, they were dead. Together, they had a slim chance. Grab the hard drives, Dante commanded, holstering the weapon at his hip. And the blue folder. We're going to the safe house. Getting out of the estate was the first hurdle. Dante called Dominic, the guard who had let Sarah in, the only man on the payroll Dante trusted implicitly. Dominic drove a modified Mercedes G-Wagon around the back. Silvio's men are at the gate, Dominic grunted as he helped transfer Dante from his wheelchair to the passenger seat. The process was undignified, painful, and slow. Sarah watched, her heart aching, as Dante gritted his teeth, sweating through the pain of his spasms. He hated being handled, hated the vulnerability. Floor it, Dante said once he was strapped in. They didn't go out the main gate. Dominic drove the heavy SUV through the manicured rose gardens, crashing through a wooden perimeter fence and onto a service road that led into the woods. Where are we going? Sarah asked from the back seat, clutching the bag of evidence. Pick up your daughter first, Dante said. Then we go to the glass castle. The pickup at the elementary school was a blur of anxiety. Sarah ran in, breathless, signing Lily out early with a lie about a dentist appointment. When she walked back to the idling black SUV, holding the hand of a confused 5-year-old with pigtails, she saw Dominic standing guard and the dark tinted window roll down. Lily climbed into the back seat, clutching her worn-out teddy bear, Mr. Fuzz. She looked at the man in the front seat. Are you a bad guy? Lily asked innocently, staring at Dante's sharp profile. Dante turned his head. The scar above his eyebrow, usually menacing, softened slightly. No, Piccola, I'm just a broken one. My toy broke yesterday, Lily said matter-of-factly. Mommy fixed it with glue. Do you need glue? For the second time since meeting Sarah, Dante smiled. I think I need something stronger than glue. They drove for 3 hours, heading deep into the Hudson Valley. The scenery changed from urban sprawl to dense, autumnal forests. They turned up a winding, private road that seemed to lead nowhere until the trees broke and revealed a structure jutting out of the cliffside. It was a modern architectural marvel, floor-to-ceiling glass, steel beams, and isolation. The Glass Castle. It was a property Dante had bought under a shell corporation named Obsidian Holdings before his accident. His father didn't know it existed. Silvio definitely didn't. Inside, the house was cold and dusty. Dominic did a sweep of the perimeter, while Sarah helped Dante into the spare wheelchair he kept there. That evening, as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, the reality of their situation set in. They were fugitives. Sarah cooked a simple pasta dish with ingredients found in the pantry. They sat at the kitchen island, Sarah, Dante, and little Lily. It was a surreal domestic scene. The Mafia prince and the waitress breaking bread while a hit man stood guard outside. "The numbers," Dante said, pushing his plate away. "Show me what you found." Sarah opened the laptop. "Here, look at the shell companies. Red Star Logistics, Volga Imports, KGB Holdings. That one is a joke, obviously. But they all trace back to one offshore account in the Caymans. The beneficiary isn't Silvio." "Who is it?" "It's a holding company linked to Nikolai Volkov." Dante's blood ran cold. Volkov, the butcher of Brighton Beach. "You know him?" "He's the one who ordered the bomb," Dante whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. 3 years ago. My father refused to let Volkov run drugs through our unions. Volkov retaliated by trying to kill me. He wanted to end the Moretti line. Dante's hands shook, rattling the wheelchair armrests. "Silvio isn't just stealing. He's made a deal with the devil. He's selling the family out to the man who crippled me. In exchange for what? The throne? If Silvio takes over," Sarah reasoned, "he'll let Volkov in. The city will turn into a war zone." "My father," Dante said, his voice dropping. "The annual Moretti Gala is in 2 days. It's held at Oheka Castle this year. All the heads of the 5 families will be there. It's the perfect stage for a transition of power." "Or an execution," Sarah added grimly. Dante looked at his legs. Useless. Dead weight. Then he looked at Sarah, and then at Lily, who was asleep on the sofa, clutching her bear. "I have to go back," Dante said. "I have to stop him." "You can't," Sarah argued. "You're one man in a chair. Silvio has an army." "I have the truth," Dante said. "And I have you." "Me?" Sarah laughed, a frantic, hysterical sound. "I'm a waitress, Dante. I serve coffee. I don't take down crime lords." "You saw what no one else saw," Dante said intensely, wheeling closer to her. He reached out and took her hand. His skin was rough, warm. "You saw the man, not the chair. You saw the theft, not just the numbers. You are smarter than any captain I have. And right now, you are the only person in this world I trust." The air between them crackled. It wasn't just adrenaline anymore. It was an intimacy forged in fire. Sarah looked at his lips, then his eyes. She realized that despite the wheelchair, despite the danger, she was falling for him. Not the money, not the power, but the broken, brilliant soul beneath. "If we go back," Sarah whispered, "we do it my way. Your way. You can't just roll in there and shout. You need to make an entrance. You need to look like the king they forgot you were." She stood up, her eyes blazing with a new determination. "If we're going to crash a party, Dante, we're going to do it in style." Oheka Castle was a monument to excess. The historic estate on Long Island's Gold Coast was illuminated by floodlights, looking like something out of The Great Gatsby, but with more snipers on the roof. The annual Moretti Gala was the event of the season for the underworld. Politicians, judges, and union leaders rubbed elbows with capos and street bosses. The champagne flowed like water, and the air smelled of expensive perfume and Cuban cigars. In the grand ballroom, Don Vittorio Moretti sat on a velvet throne-like chair. He looked older than he had in the restaurant. His skin was grey, his breathing laboured. Beside him stood Silvio, looking triumphant in a white tuxedo, shaking hands, playing the part of the dutiful nephew and heir apparent. "Your father looks ill," a captain named Paulie whispered to Silvio. "He is tired," Silvio said smoothly, his eyes scanning the room. The burden of the crown weighs heavy. Soon he will rest. Silvio checked his watch. 9:30 deine Uhr. The Russians were en route. At 9:15, Volkov would enter, and Silvio would announce the merger. If Vittorio objected, the old man's heart medication, which Silvio had swapped for sugar pills 3 days ago, would ensure he didn't object for long. But at 9:05 p.m., the music stopped. It wasn't a scheduled break. The live orchestra simply faltered and died away. The murmur of the crowd grew into a confused silence. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. Normally, guests were announced by a herald. But tonight, there was no announcement. There was only the sound of a cane striking the marble floor. Click, click, click. The crowd gasped. Standing at the top of the stairs was Dante Moretti. He was not in his wheelchair. He was braced by heavy, futuristic carbon fiber leg braces that locked his knees in place. Exoskeletal supports hidden beneath his midnight blue tuxedo trousers. He was leaning heavily on a black cane with a silver wolf's head handle, and on his other side, supporting his arm, was a woman. Sarah. She looked unrecognizable. The waitress apron was gone. She wore a gown of liquid silver that hugged every curve, a dress she and Dominic had procured from a high-end boutique in the city that morning, using Dante's emergency credit line. Her hair was swept up, revealing a neck that held a diamond necklace worth a small country. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. Together, they descended the stairs. It was slow, painful. Every step was a battle for Dante. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his face was a mask of cold fury. Left foot, swing, plant. Right foot. The room watched in stunned silence. The crippled prince was walking. Silvio's glass of champagne slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. His face went white. "Impossible!" he hissed. Dante reached the bottom of the stairs. He was breathing hard, his body screaming in agony. But the adrenaline and Sarah's firm grip on his arm kept him upright. He walked straight to his father. Vittorio stared at his son as if seeing a ghost. He tried to stand, but his legs were weak. "Dante?" he croaked. "You are walking." "I am standing, father." Dante's voice projected through the silent ballroom, deep and authoritative. "Because someone had to stand up for this family." Silvio rushed forward, his composure cracking. "What is this stunt? Get him a chair! He's delirious!" "Back off, Silvio!" Dante snarled. He didn't need the microphone. His rage filled the room. Sarah stepped forward, opening the silver clutch she carried. She didn't pull out lipstick. She pulled out a stack of folded documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah spoke, her voice clear, bell-like, terrifyingly calm. "I am the auditor for the Moretti estate. These documents confirm that for the last 2 years, Silvio Moretti has embezzled $40 million from the family pension fund." A collective gasp went through the room. Theft was one thing, stealing from the family pension, from the widows and orphans of made men, was a death sentence. "Lies!" Silvio screamed. "She's a whore, a waitress." "She's my fiancée," Dante interrupted, the lie slipping out easily, shocking Sarah almost as much as the crowd, and the future matriarch of this family. "But there is more." Dante looked at the heavy oak doors of the main entrance. "Open them," he commanded the guards. The guards hesitated, looking to Vittorio. The Don gave a weak nod. The doors opened. 2 men were dragged in by Dominic, and a team of loyalists Dante had contacted from the safe house. The men dragged in were battered, bruised, and speaking Russian. "These men were waiting in a van 3 blocks away," Dante announced. "They are Volkov's lieutenants. They were waiting for a signal from Silvio to enter and slaughter the heads of the 5 families." The room erupted. Guns were drawn instantly. The tension snapped like a rubber band. Dante turned to Silvio. "You sold us out to the man who took my legs. You sold your own blood to the Russians." Silvio looked around. He saw the anger in the eyes of the captains. He saw his support evaporating. He was cornered. Suddenly, Silvio lunged. He didn't go for Dante. He knew he couldn't beat the guards. He went for the weak link. He grabbed Sarah. In one fluid motion, Silvio pulled a small pistol from his waistband and wrapped his arm around Sarah's neck, jamming the gun against her temple. "Back up!" Silvio screamed, dragging Sarah backward toward the kitchen service exit. "Back up or I paint the walls with her brains!" Sarah gasped, her hands clawing at Silvio's arm. She locked eyes with Dante. Dante stood frozen. His braces locked his legs. He couldn't run. He couldn't lunge. He was a statue. "Dante!" Sarah cried out. "Let her go, Silvio," Dante said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Let her go, and I'll let you live." "You have no power here, cripple," Silvio spat, backing away. "I have the girl. I have the money. Volkov is coming." Vittorio, the old Don, tried to rise, clutching his chest. "Silvio, you traitor! Shut up, old man! You should have died years ago!" Silvio fired a warning shot into the ceiling, making the crowd duck. He dragged Sarah through the kitchen doors, disappearing from sight. "No!" Dante roared. He tried to move, to run, but the braces were heavy, clunky. He fell to his knees, hitting the marble with a sickening crack. The illusion of the strong, walking king was shattered. He was just a man on the floor, unable to save the woman he loved. Dominic rushed to him. "Boss, stay down!" "Get me my chair!" Dante gritted out, tears of rage mixing with the sweat on his face. "Get me my goddamn chair, and get the car!" "The Russians are 5 minutes out," Dominic warned. "We have to barricade the doors." "I don't care about the Russians!" Dante yelled, grabbing Dominic by the lapels. "Silvio has Sarah. If he hurts her, I will burn this city to ash." The parking lot of Oheka Castle was chaos. Guests were screaming, valets were running, and sirens wailed in the distance. But Dante Moretti heard none of it. His world had narrowed down to the taillights of a silver Porsche speeding toward the exit. Silvio's car with Sarah inside. "Dominic, the keys!" Dante roared. Dominic didn't argue about wheelchairs or safety. He knew the look in Dante's eyes. It was the look of a man who had already died once and had nothing left to lose. Dominic threw the keys to the matte black McLaren, specially modified with hand controls. Dante pulled himself into the driver's seat, his upper body strength compensating for his useless legs. He slammed the door, keyed the ignition, and the engine roared like a waking dragon. He didn't wait for Dominic. He peeled out of the lot, tires screaming, chasing the silver Porsche into the dark Long Island night. The chase was a blur of adrenaline. They wove through traffic on the LIE, hitting speeds of 140 miles per hour. Dante's hands were steady on the wheel, his thumb hovering over the accelerator trigger on the steering column. "I won't lose her," he chanted in his mind. "I waited 28 years to feel alive. I won't let him take it away." Silvio was heading for the shipping yards in Brooklyn. It was a predictable move. Territory controlled by the Russians. He was looking for an extraction. Dante drifted around the corners of the industrial district, the McLaren eating up the distance. He saw the Porsche crash through a chain-link fence and screech to a halt near the water's edge, under the towering cranes of the docks. Dante slammed on his brakes, drifting the McLaren sideways to block the exit. He grabbed his gun and opened the door. This was the moment of truth. He didn't have his exoskeleton braces. He didn't have his cane. He dragged himself out of the car, hitting the cold, oily asphalt. He used the car door to prop himself up, aiming his weapon over the hood. "Silvio!" Dante screamed, his voice echoing off the shipping containers. Silvio emerged from the Porsche, dragging Sarah by her hair. She was crying, her silver dress torn, her heels lost in the scuffle. Silvio pressed his gun to her temple, using her as a human shield. "Stay down, cripple." Silvio laughed, though his voice was edged with hysteria. "You look pathetic, crawling on the ground, like a worm." "Let her go," Dante said, his aim steady despite his position. "It's over, Dante," Silvio yelled. "Volkov is sending a boat. In 10 minutes, I'll be in international waters with the accounts, and you'll be dead. I win. I always win. I was the one who should have been the son. I was the one who ran the business while you sat in that chair, feeling sorry for yourself." "You didn't just run the business," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking but fierce. "You planted the bomb. You tried to kill your own cousin." "Of course I did," Silvio confessed, grinning wildly. "And I'd do it again. He was weak. The family needs a strong leader." Suddenly, bright floodlights from the water blinded them. A massive yacht was pulling up to the dock. The Russian flag fluttered in the wind. "Here they are," Silvio cheered. "Goodbye, Dante. Say hello to hell for me." Silvio raised his gun, moving it from Sarah's head to point at Dante across the parking lot. At this distance, with Dante immobile on the ground, he was a sitting duck. Dante didn't flinch. He didn't fire. He just lowered his gun and smiled. "You're right, Silvio," Dante said softly. "The Russians are here." And here is the twist. The gangway of the yacht lowered, but the men who walked down weren't Volkov's soldiers. The first man to step onto the dock was tall, terrifying, and distinctly not Russian. It was Don Vittorio Moretti. Silvio's jaw dropped. "Uncle Vittorio." Behind Vittorio walked Dominic and a dozen of the Moretti family's most loyal enforcers, all heavily armed. "You," Silvio stammered, backing up, dragging Sarah with him. "But Volkov. I called Volkov. Volkov is a businessman," Dante called out from his spot by the car. "And Sarah found his price in your ledgers. We bought him out this morning, Silvio. We paid him double what you offered, using the very money you stole." Silvio looked at the yacht, then at Dante, then at Vittorio. The realization washed over him. He was alone. Vittorio walked forward, his cane tapping rhythmically on the concrete. He didn't look like a frail old man anymore. He looked like the Godfather. "You tried to kill my son," Vittorio said, his voice low and dangerous. "You stole from my table, and you threatened a woman under my protection. He's a cripple, Uncle," Silvio pleaded, sweat pouring down his face. "He can't lead. I did it for the family. A man who stands on the backs of women and betrays his blood is not a man," Vittorio said. "Dante may not be able to walk, but he has never stood taller than he did tonight." Vittorio nodded to the snipers on the boat. Silvio panicked. He raised his gun to shoot Sarah, a final act of spite. Bang! The shot didn't come from the snipers, and it didn't come from Dante. Silvio gasped, his eyes going wide. He looked down at his chest. A red blossom was spreading on his white tuxedo shirt. He crumpled to the ground, releasing his grip on Sarah. Sarah stood there, shivering, holding a small, pearl-handled Derringer pistol that had been strapped to her thigh beneath the silver dress. Dante had given it to her in the car before the party. "Just in case," he had said. She dropped the gun, her hands shaking violently. She had never fired a weapon in her life. Dante dragged himself forward, ignoring the pain in his knees, ignoring the oil and dirt ruining his tuxedo. "Sarah!" She ran to him. She didn't care that he was on the ground. She collapsed onto the asphalt beside him, burying her face in his neck, sobbing. "I got him," she whispered. "I got the bad guy." Dante wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight he thought he might break her ribs. He kissed her hair, her forehead, her tears. "You did, Cara. You did. It's over. Vittorio walked over to them. He looked down at his son and the waitress on the ground. For the first time in years, there was no disappointment in his eyes. There was only respect. "Dominic," Vittorio commanded, "help my son up, and get a coat for his lady. It's cold out here." 1 year later. The rain lashed against the heavy pane-glass windows of the Gilded Lily, blurring the lights of New York City into streaks of gold and charcoal. It was a Tuesday night. It was 8 p.m. The weather was almost identical to that wretched night exactly 1 year ago, but inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was a universe apart. The restaurant was not silent. It was not a tomb. It was vibrating with life, the hum of conversation and the clatter of silverware against fine china. The air didn't smell of fear and stale wine. It smelled of truffle risotto, roasted garlic, and the expensive perfume of the city's new elite. The chandelier above table 1 still cast its fracturing, diamond-like light. For years, that light had felt like an interrogation lamp to Dante Moretti. Tonight, however, it felt like a spotlight on a stage where a triumph was taking place. Dante sat at the head of the table. He was still in a wheelchair, a sleek, matte black carbon fiber model that hummed with precision engineering. He had not found a magical cure. He had not miraculously walked into the sunset. The paralysis was a part of him, a permanent scar from a war he had survived. But as he surveyed the room, his posture was not one of a broken man. He sat with his shoulders back, his chest broad, radiating a quiet, lethal confidence that was far more intimidating than his father's shouting ever was. He didn't need to stand to be the tallest man in the room. But the most important difference wasn't Dante's posture. It was the chairs. The table for 10 was full. To Dante's immediate right sat Don Vittorio Moretti. The butcher of the Bronx was technically retired, though he still wore a suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. The lines on his face had deepened, but the perpetual scowl was gone, replaced by a look of bemused concentration. He was currently holding a breadstick like a cigar, listening intently to the 6-year-old girl perched on the chair next to him. "So, you have to understand, Grandpa Vic," Lily said, her voice serious and grave. She was wearing a pink plastic tiara that clashed horribly with the restaurant's decor, and she looked absolutely perfect. Rainbow Dash is the fastest, obviously, but she makes bad choices. She's too impulsive. Vittorio nodded slowly, stroking his chin. Impulsive. Bad for business. You need a cool head to run the herd. Exactly, Lily agreed, dipping a piece of calamari into marinara sauce. That's why Twilight Sparkle is the boss. She reads books. She has a plan. She's like Mommy. Vittorio let out a bark of laughter that made the waiters jump. He reached out and wiped a smudge of sauce from Lily's cheek with a linen napkin, a gesture so tender it seemed impossible coming from hands that had ended so many lives. You are smart, Piccola. Always listen to the ones who read the books. Muscles are cheap. Brains are expensive. Dante watched them, a lump forming in his throat. A year ago, his father had looked at him with disgust. Now, Vittorio looked at his adopted granddaughter with pure adoration. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 months ago. Lily didn't just have a new last name. She had an army of uncles who would level a city block if she scraped her knee. To Dante's left sat Dominic, his head of security. Dominic was trying to eat his linguine while simultaneously scanning the room for threats, a habit old soldiers couldn't break. Next to him were 3 of Dante's new capos, younger men, promoted not for their brutality, but for their loyalty and business acumen. They were laughing, drinking wine, and actually enjoying the birthday dinner. There was no fear at this table, only respect. And then there was the empty chair to Dante's right, except it wasn't empty. Sarah was just making her rounds. Dante turned his head to watch her. She was speaking to Arthur, the maître d', near the kitchen doors. Sarah wore a dress of midnight blue velvet that hugged her curves, shimmering slightly as she moved. Around her neck sat the Moretti heirloom diamond, a stone that had been locked in a vault since the 1940s. She looked every inch the queen of the New York underworld, but as Dante watched, he saw her gently fix Arthur's tie and whisper something that made the nervous old man smile. She wasn't just the boss's wife, she was the heart of the operation. She ran the Moretti Foundation now, funneling the family's immense wealth into schools, hospitals, and community centers. She was washing the blood money clean, one scholarship at a time. She caught Dante staring. She winked, that same cheeky, fearless wink she had given him when she was just a waitress with a stain remover stick. She walked back to the table, her hand trailing along Dante's shoulder as she sat down. The touch was grounding. It was electric. "Everything okay?" Dante asked quietly, taking her hand under the table. "Arthur was worried about the wine pairing for the third course," Sarah whispered back, leaning in close. "I told him that if you could handle Silvio and the Russians, you could probably survive a Pinot Noir that wasn't perfectly breathed." Dante chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. "You're dangerous, Mrs. Moretti. I learned from the best." She squeezed his hand, her thumb tracing the engagement ring she wore, a simple, elegant band that she refused to trade for anything gaudier. Arthur approached the table, clearing his throat. The room went quiet. The staff gathered around, sensing the moment. "The cake, Don Dante?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling slightly less than it had a year ago. "Bring it out," Dante commanded. The double doors swung open. Two waiters wheeled out a cart bearing a magnificent confection. It was a three-tiered architectural marvel of gold leaf, dark chocolate, and spun sugar. It was a cake fit for a king, topped with the number 29 in sparkling edible silver. The table oohed and ahed. Vittorio nodded in approval. "Now that," the old Don said, "is a proper tribute." But as the cart came to a halt, Sarah stood up. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. She reached down into her designer purse, rummaging past her phone and a stray Barbie doll shoe. The table fell silent. Dominic's hand twitched toward his jacket, out of instinct, then relaxed as he realized what she was doing. Sarah pulled out a small, white cardboard box. It was battered. It was cheap. She opened it and pulled out a single, slightly smashed chocolate cupcake. The frosting was smeared against the side. It looked like something from a vending machine. She placed it on the pristine white tablecloth, right in front of Dante, overshadowing the $1,000 masterpiece on the cart. She struck a match and lit a single, flickering white candle stuck into the center of the lopsided treat. "Tradition," Sarah said softly, her eyes locking with his. The room was dead silent. But this wasn't the silence of awkwardness or pity that had suffocated Dante a year ago. This was the silence of reverence. Everyone at the table knew the story. They knew that this 25-cent cupcake had brought down an empire and built a new one. Dante looked at the little flame. It danced in the draft of the air conditioning, fragile and defiant. He remembered sitting here alone, the wine dripping onto his legs, wishing he could just disappear. He remembered the darkness. And then he remembered the light. Sarah walking through those doors when everyone else had walked out. He looked up. He saw the faces of his men, loyal and proud. He saw his father, a man redeemed by the love of a grandchild. He saw Lily, her eyes wide, waiting for the magic of the wish. And he saw Sarah. Her honey-colored eyes were shining with tears she refused to shed. She was his legs, his heart, his sanity. She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. "Make a wish, my love." Dante looked at the candle, then back at his family. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the scent of vanilla and rain that always clung to her. "I can't," Dante said, his voice thick with an emotion that threatened to crack his composure. "Why not?" Lily asked, concerned. "You have to wish, Daddy, or it doesn't count." Dante smiled, a genuine, blinding smile that reached his eyes. He squeezed Sarah's hand so tight he felt her pulse beating against his palm. "I can't make a wish, Lily," Dante said, looking at his daughter, then his father, and finally resting his gaze on his wife. "Because a wish is for something you don't have." He gestured to the table, the noise, the love, the chaos, the family. "And I already have everything I ever wanted." Dante leaned forward and blew out the candle. For a second, the thin trail of grey smoke drifted up toward the diamond chandelier. Then the room erupted. Lily cheered the loudest, throwing her hands in the air. The captains clapped, Dominic pounded the table, and even Vittorio let out a rare, boisterous cheer. Dante didn't hear the applause. He only heard Sarah's breath as he pulled her down into his lap, ignoring the wheelchair, ignoring the world. He kissed her, a deep, searing kiss that promised forever. The table for 10 was full. The darkness was gone, and the king and his queen had only just begun to rule. And that is the story of Dante and Sarah, a reminder that sometimes the person who saves you isn't a knight in shining armor, but a waitress with a cupcake and a heart of gold. Love can bloom in the darkest of places, and even the most broken among us deserve a seat at the table. If this story touched your heart, or if you were cheering when Sarah finally took down the villain, please give this video a like. It helps us create more stories like this for you. What do you think Dante's first rule was as the new boss? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new episode of our romance sagas. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next story.